All right, my name is Ryan Oles. I'm a developer here in Austin, Texas. I've been working with Drupal for about 6 years, and I started playing with Node.js maybe 2 years ago. I work for Intermedia here in town, so I guess fitting they put me in this room. But you can get a hold of me in any of these places. It's all the usual suspects. The top is my blog, where I actually detail a lot of what I'm talking about today. So if this is interesting to you, go check it out. It steps through it probably in more clarity than I'll be able to right now. And then all of the code snippets from this are on my GitHub account. So if you want to check out the demos, or if you want to check out what I've walked through, it's all posted there. So Node.js, right? It's kind of a hot word right now. I'm assuming everyone has some understanding of it if you're in this room. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over what Node.js is. But when I started with Node.js, it was fun. It was a lot of fun. And at that time, I'd been working with Drupal for several years, and working with the two simultaneously, it was very black and white. Like, Drupal had felt very humdrum to me for a while, and Node.js was this new, exciting, all the cool kids are doing it kind of thing. And it got me curious, right? I've spent all this time and investment in Drupal, and I'm wondering how these technologies can merge. Briefly, Node.js, server-side JavaScript, single-threaded event loop. The code must be non-blocking since it is a single-threaded event loop. And the claim to fame is Socket.io, and it allows for real-time client-server communication. This is kind of, in my opinion, what springboarded a lot of Node.js's popularity. That's great, but what does this have to do with Drupal? Traditionally, and when I talk to most people, their integrations look something like this. They'll build a Node.js application, talking to some front end, either rendering it or talking to a static page. And then Drupal's involvement really is just kind of turning on services and communicating over REST, just like, hey, Drupal, I need some information that you have in your management system. Let me know what you think about that. And they're pretty separate. Which is good. That model works, I think, very well for most Node applications. But curiously, there's this module called the Node.js integration module. And it kind of more tightly couples the handshake that happens between Drupal and Node. I thought this was odd. I kind of was wondering where they were going with this and what it would enable us to do. That's where it lives on Drupal.org. It was originally written by Justin Randall. He goes by Bejeebus. I think he did this in 2011, I believe. Really smart, really cool guy. And if you listen to any of his talks about this, he'll say this over and over again. It handles the plumbing. And your initial contact with this module, you more than likely won't be writing any Node.js. You'll just be kind of doing Drupal as usual. So this module allows you to push a message from Drupal through a Node.js pipework and have it spit out in the client without you having to worry about the handshake and authentication that goes behind any of that. Speaking of authentication, it's worth walking through and seeing how this happens. If you've been in a talk about this module, you've probably seen this before, but this is in the context of a page request. So Drupal's doing a page load and sending all the normal Drupal-y things and the session stuff to the client. But it's also sending along an authentication token. The client, through Socket.io, sends this to the Node.js server, saying, hey, Drupal gave me this auth token. Can you authenticate me? Node.js says, hey, the client just sent me this authentication token that Drupal apparently sent it. Let me know what you think about this. Drupal says, oh, that's great. I have some information about this auth token, and passes back some relevant client or relevant user information. User IDs, channels are very important. Just things that Node would be concerned about with the Drupal user who made the request. Oop, one more. And Node.js then sends a response back to the client saying, hey, congratulations, you've been authenticated. We know who you are in the Drupal context. Subsequent page loads are kind of handy, like Drupal and Node no longer have to talk to each other. If the client is already authenticated, Drupal's going to send the auth token The client sends that to Node. Node remembers and says, hey, I know who you are. Like, you're good to go. What's interesting about this is those arrows, those lines of communication. It means through this module, they're somehow communicating in all of those directions. Like, Drupal to the client is fairly obvious, but Drupal to Node and Node to Drupal and Node back and forth to the client may not be so much. And again, the initial contact with this module, you probably won't see any of this, but when I see this diagram, it's really intriguing. I'm wondering how they're making those communications happen. Messages are the name of the game. So I've probably said it several times already, but this is all happening through Socket.io and sending messages from one instance to another. So Drupal sends Node a message, Node sends that message to the client, or vice versa. It all boils down to messages when using this module. A good example of this is the Node.js Notify module, which is included in the suite of modules. So if you install the Node.js integration module, this module comes with it. You just turn it on, like config as normal. What it does is it uses JGRAL notifications. If you're not familiar with that, it's a lot like Growl on a Mac. If you use a Mac, when someone chats you or something, the little pop-up comes up and says, you know, so-and-so said something. Well, it allows for that inside of a browser. So you can broadcast messages to any connected user, and it will display for them as a little JGRAL notification. I mentioned this because it's a good introduction to messages. There's as simple as it is, we're building a message and we're going to broadcast it. We have a subject, hey, how's it going? Node.js broadcast message, our subject and our body, and then everyone who has permissions to see the JGRAL notifications will receive them in real time as soon as that function runs. What's interesting is to look a little deeper at this. This is that same function, its implementation in the Node.js module. We see that we're building, our message is a little more complex than it was before. We're building a message object. It has some extra properties like broadcast and channel. And then we're using another function, Node.js in-queue message. So this is a level deeper, I still think fairly simple, and suddenly becomes important as we want to maybe skin this module a little bit. So messages are sent across channels. We don't always want to just broadcast to everyone, just blast out what we want to say. Sometimes we want this to only go to a finite group of people. To do this, we register user channels. I might be getting ahead of myself a little bit. And essentially, it's allowing different pipes for these messages to go on. So you might want to blast something to everybody, but then you might want to blast something just to your administrators. And maybe you want users to be added to these channels after they perform some kind of action, and then they'll get notifications relevant to that. A good example of this is another project on Drupal.org called Message.js. It's a real small module. I wrote this in Denver, DrupalCon Denver, after I saw a great talk about the message module. If you guys have messed with that, it's worth a look. Basically, what the message module does is allow you to file messages based on any event. So it's like something happened, like I'm going to file a message, and there's a little bit of handling built in. How long is that message going to be alive? Who gets to see it? Stuff like that. What this module does is allow those messages to be broadcast through the JGRAL notification module. So here's a code snippet from within that module, and it's a good example of hook Node.js user channels. This is a hook provided by the Node.js module, and it allows us to hook into that authentication process we were just talking about. So Node is communicating to Drupal saying, hey, I got this auth token. Drupal says, oh, I recognize that, loads up a user object, which is the auth user here, and then lets us hook in if we want and do something extra. Maybe we want to add something to that object that's about to be sent back to Node. In this case, we're checking permissions on that user. Receive Message.js notifications. You got that permission, you're on that channel, so you'll be receiving messages. And then we fire the message as usual. The formatting is a little different here, but we're just building a message object and then firing our Node.js in-queue message, much like the implementation of the broadcast function we looked at a few slides back. Something interesting about this module before I move on is there's no JavaScript. Like, this all happens without me having to write any JavaScript. It's all PHP. And that, I think, is the original intent of this module, the Node.js integration module, that is. So this is quickly going to lead to, like, wanting to handle these messages on your own. Like JGraal's cool and all, but it'll get annoying, and what's it really worth after just some pop-ups? To do this, I have a demonstration module called Swap It. It's just a real simple implementation of this. I've taken some code snippets from this. First thing, we need to tell Drupal that we're going to handle the message ourselves. And we do this with hook Node.js handlers info. All this does is we're defining a path to our client-side JavaScript. Like the callback that's going to handle this message lives here, is all that's saying. It also handles all the Drupal add.js for us. Where do we go from here? Oh, and then once again, we're building a module, or building a message and sending it as usual. The thing to note here is the message callback property in the object. And then finally, we're on our client-side JavaScript that we've defined. This is the file that we were pointing the handler at, and we're defining a callback inside of here. We're just doing some simple stuff, binding it to a form element to change some HTML. You can see that the message is being passed in as a variable, but the really important thing is how it's defined at the top in the Drupal object. Drupal Node.js callback swap it. That swap it, it has to be the same as the callback you define in the message that you're sending. So when you send a message, it's going to go scrolling through those callbacks looking for the callback that you've defined. So if it doesn't find it, you're out of luck. But those two things need to line up. I have a short demo of this. Hopefully it'll work. This is kind of weird from this angle. This is live too. It's at demo.theoldschool.com/swap if you want to go check it out. And all this module does is it takes, I'm going to refresh for good measure here. All this does is it takes an input and broadcasts it to everyone sitting on that channel. Someone beat me to it. But yeah, so there's a listener happening there for all those messages. And rather than displaying a JGraal notification, it's just going to update a piece of the DOM. So what's cool about this is a Drupal rendered page. That's a Drupal rendered form. And the submit handler on that is firing PHP. There's no JavaScript there. And then with just a small JavaScript snippet, we're able to do some pretty simple DOM manipulation. Is totally Drupal, yeah. Right, on the person who submitted, right. And actually, if you get get a second when it isn't as active, if you open two windows side by side and you submit on one side and watch it change on the other, the Node.js will actually happen faster than the refresh of the form submission. Because it's submitting through Ajax, actually. I'm using the Drupal built-in form Ajax stuff. And the Node.js broadcast is beating the Ajax in rendering the updated form. It's something interesting, I guess. So just to review, this I think that pretty much covers, I think, the original intent of the module. So where do we stand? It handles authentication for us in a really nice way. Like Bejiba says, it handles the plugging. And then it publishes messages via socket.io. And we're able to define channels through our hook function there, and then we're able to customize our client-side JavaScript. So I think that is the outward-facing stuff of this module. There's not a lot of documentation on this module, and I think by and large this is what it's touted as. I decided to dig a little deeper because there's really no Node.js that I'm doing here, like a little bit of client-side JavaScript, but mostly it was just all Drupal. So it's like, well, what if I really want to dig in and do some Node? Like that's the fun part, right? Like writing these Node servers and handling your callbacks and just doing some of this cool stuff on the server side. So I was curious if this was possible through this module. And I guess 2 years ago they added something called server extensions. There's an example in the module code, Node.js server extension JS example, And you can go and enable it, and it'll send you console logs of all of the actions that are happening on the Node server. I'm getting ahead of myself. So you can see all the steps of this authentication, including client-side messaging that's happening, and it's allowing you to add code to those callbacks as they happen. So this may make more sense as we move along. If you look in here, it's wrapped by this export setup, and it's passing in config. The config object is super useful. There's several methods in there and a lot of variables. You can see all of your channels. You can see the users who've been authenticated. And then there's these three very useful functions: publish message to client, publish message to channel, and send message to backend. This is using process, which is built into Node. It's an event handler. These are the events that have been registered with it: client connection, client authenticated, client message, and client disconnect. Basically, that's sitting there listening for each of these things to happen and allowing you to do something on those cases. You can almost think of it as somewhat analogous to the Drupal hook system. Like, oh, a client connected, you want to do something, go ahead and do it. We'll give you an avenue for that. As an example, we'll take client connection. If you're familiar with Node, it's a callback, so this should look somewhat familiar. It's passing in the session ID, which is handy. Here we aren't really doing much. We're just logging to the console, hey, we got a connection from this session, and then we're using our publish message to client to send a message back to the client and say, hey, we got your session. What enables us to do that is we have, number one, the session ID, and number two, like the awareness of what's happening on the Node server. So can the client talk back to the Node server? So far we've built up to Node speaking to client, like without any Drupal interference, but can client talk back to Node? It turns out it can. It does this through Socket.io, through the same mechanism that it used to authenticate. When Drupal passed the auth token, the client sends that back to Node through Socket.io. That's buried in the Drupal object, drupal.nodejs.socket.emit, but it works just like Socket.io, just like you'd expect. It's being passed along. Pretty handy. Easy to use. We'll build a simple message, call it node to Drupal, hello from the client side, and then use our socket emit to send that message. You can see it there on the second line. We're binding that to a submit function on a Drupal form, but it could be anywhere. Then back on the Node side, so the client is sending a message. Now Node is going to fire another callback, client message. It's like, okay, well, one of your clients has sent a message. What do you want to do about it? Again, we're just logging the message to the console, and then maybe sending a message back saying, hey, we got your message. So through this, we've established two-way communication between the Node server and the client through pretty typical Node means. Like this, none of this should be real surprising if you do a lot of Node. But what's interesting is it's outside of the Drupal scope. We're aware of these users, we're aware of the authentication, but we aren't really having to talk to Drupal. It's just back and forth from Node and client. So the last remaining bit is, can we get the Node server to talk to Drupal using this module? Turns out we can. Some of the examples I've been showing and the ones to follow are from this project, Node to Drupal. It's a little demo, probably the most boring module in existence. But Drupal needs to know what to expect. Like, we need to tell Drupal, hey, Node is going to communicate to you, and this is how. To do that, we use hook Node.js message callback, and we're switching on a type. So when we send a message from Node back to Drupal, we're going to specify a type in that message object, and it's going to come through this switch statement and fire that return array. The string in that return array is a function name, and there's its implementation. So it takes message, which is the message coming from Node, and then it's going to pass back response, which it's an optional response back to the Node server. So here we're grabbing our message body, we're logging it to the Drupal watchdog, and then we're sending a response back to Node saying, hey, we logged it to the watchdog. What's useful about the response is you can use it as some error handling, right? Like, you don't want Node to talk directly to Drupal's database. So if you wanted to make a change through something that's happened on Node, you would need to do it like this. But things don't always go right when Drupal makes changes to the database. And so we would be able to inform Node, hey, there was an error when you tried to save that node or create that user or whatever. And Node would then be aware of it and could pass that along. Back on the Node side, once again, it's a callback. This is how we do it, config send message to backend. It's living in that config object. It's real important we define that message type as the same that we're looking for in the callback of the Drupal hook we just looked at. And then, once again, kind of a typical Node callback. I'm doing a little bit of error handling, like, oh, something went wrong. But if everything goes correctly, we'll just output to the console a response from Drupal. I was going to do a demo of that module, but it truly is really, it's like Drupal is rendering a form element. When the user clicks it, it just logs a watchdog message. So there's nothing real exciting about that. So what does all this mean? We can augment our Node server with server extensions. We have a bunch of callbacks in our toolkit that are defined by this module. The config object is definitely your friend. If you start getting deep into this, look in the config object. It will help you. The client can talk to the server using socket emit, and the server can talk to Drupal using the send message to backend, and along with our hook on the Drupal side to make Drupal aware of all of this. So yeah, that about sums it up. And I was trying to answer the question, and this is the gratuitous meme, of course, but I was trying to answer the question, can I create a complex Node application using this Node.js integration module without decoupling it, right? Which might be kind of a bad idea for a lot of reasons. But I just wanted to see how far we could take this, if it was even possible. I have a demo up called DChess. I want to cover one more thing before I do it, and it's content token channels. It's much like the user channels we were talking about earlier, but instead we throw the flag on a piece of content. So this could be thrown on like a node view, and thereby the module is aware of people who hit that piece of content. So say some user comes and views the node that this has been assigned to, they would pick up that channel without me having to explicitly say, like, give this user, Drupal DChess game node ID. It just kind of handles it automatically for you. And the one little, the Node.js send content channel to message, nothing real exciting. It's much like send content to channel that we saw much earlier. It's just a way for Drupal to blast to those content channels. But the thing we kind of had to patch was the Node side of that. Like I need Node to be able to send to these token channels, and that isn't implemented in the Node.js module yet. I'm filing a patch for this. I think it should be included in the config object. But as is, that's a pared down version of what the Node.js server is doing, and you have to include that in your server extension if you want to send messages to token channels through the Node.js server. Anyways, all that being said, we can check out this chess app that will hopefully work for us. The front page here, you could navigate here as well. I think you'll have to create an account to start a chess game, but there's no validation or anything. I've included a view on the front page. This is just a simple view. All of those are just nodes in Drupal. I've started a game already. I'll just do that so we don't have to sit here and watch me click on things. Originally, I wrote this interface using just jQuery, and it worked, but it was a mess. So the board's actually rendered using a small Angular snippet, just as a side note. That worked out really nicely. Whose turn is it? It's white. Kill the knight here. And you see it update on the other side. There's also a big lag happening, if you noticed. And the reason that's taking place is because every time a move's being made, a node is being saved And that is bad architecture, right? You don't want to do that. We're waiting on Drupal to save a node before we finish our callback. I mean, it's still non-blocking in the way it's implemented, but if you really wanted to write a chess engine or something, you would want something between Drupal and that node save. But I did it that way because I think it clearly demonstrates Node coming all the way back and getting Drupal to do work on the Drupal side. There's these client-side interactions happening that are communicating through Node and telling Drupal what to do. So I can go back to the front page. All this stuff has been updated. And yeah, it's back in the Drupal scope. Let's see, get back to my presentation here. A couple things to note on that. I didn't write all of the move handling. That would have taken forever. There's a great library called chess.js that will do that for you. And I used Angular to render the board. But yeah, some closing thoughts. It works great, pushing messages. That's what it was built for, and that's what it does really well. Like, you don't even have to touch Node, and you can be sending messages to the client. You can indeed build more complex applications. I would consider that chess app a complex application. But should you, right? I think there's a line, and I think I was approaching it. It was nice to make all of those nodes because we can do the Drupal-y things with it. We can plug it into views. We can just manage it as content. But as the Node application begins to grow and those become more and more tightly coupled, you run into problems. I think as long as you're keeping things as simple push message notifications, you're probably pretty safe using this module. In fact, I think you should use this module. But if you were wanting to build some big blown out single page app that's really complicated on the Node side, I think you would be better off decoupling the two. But yeah, thanks. That's all I got. Here's my contact info once again. I blew through that too. I guess, are there any questions? Man, gee, it's been a long day. Cool. Well, oh yeah, back there. Yes. Well, it's in the issue queue, so as fun as that is to search. I have 2 blog posts I'm wanting to post this weekend about this very thing. I was just kind of holding off for the talk, so you could probably find it there as well. But I'd say the issue queue if you were real curious. Yes?
So I haven't done a lot of Node.js, but I was wondering if you could comment on when you think doing something in Node.js versus doing it in Drupal on the back end, what type of applications?
Okay. That's a pretty complicated question. Overall, use Drupal when you have a lot of content, right? Or if you're building a Drupal site, it's ultimately a content management system. It can do, obviously, very complicated PHP side applications. And if you aren't after things like, if you aren't after like some real timiness, or if it isn't just like one specific task that you want to like assign to a server, I'd say stick with Drupal, really. But if you have like this one thing and you want it to do it well, and you just want to have this like little server as a service, Node would be great for that. Or if you wanted real-time kind of communication, or if you're working on a big JavaScript stack, like Node.js is great for all of those things. So there's a better answer than that, but I think that covers it. Yeah. Anything else? All right. Well, yeah. Okay, so several of the modules included with the Node.js module use this in a variety of ways. So there's a watchdog module where you can actually look at the watchdog and see them come through in real time. There's a lot of work happening right now with this module and views, which I'm a little skeptical about, but supposedly you'll be able to sit and watch a view update real time. So as things are changing in the database, the view will automatically represent that. I don't know, I've implemented it with logging in and logging out, like notifying administrators if certain users, are hitting the site, things like that. All right, well, maybe I'll run into you guys tonight. Thanks again.